Great. So today I'm going to walk you guys through the admin experience in Lattice. So I know that on the call we have some admins that have been with Lattice for a while, and then also some of you that are new. Really, today's main focus is really just going to be about setting up Lattice. Both the manager tools, so the updates one-on-ones. We'll spend some time going through our real-time feedback tool, goal setting tool, and then we'll have about half the time to go through the performance review tool. The reason that is that the performance review tool is kind of our most heavyweight tool. So I'll make sure there's plenty of time for templates, review cycle setup, and also managing a review cycle. I'd also love to hear feedback. So at the end, I'm actually going to share a link with the short survey just to make sure that kind of the content we're covering is really helpful. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. This is a live training, so I will probably hold your questions until the end. If there's anything I can't get to or any kind of additional information I need to provide you, I will obviously follow up with you individually. But thank you all for joining, and let's actually dive into the product. Awesome. So to start, and again, this is new to some of you, but Lattice essentially looks like this. So at the top, it's navigated by the you, your team, company, and admin page. The You page is just your own unique employee profile page. So this is where you can actually go and look at all of your historical data in one place. So in this case, I'm in kind of a dummy instance. I'm Joseph Stone. Michael's my manager. These are my 3 direct reports. And then I also have 4 peers. On the right, you can just see all of my historical performance reviews, any goals I have, and then any kind of real-time feedback as well. At the top are just my tasks. So these generally coincide with like an action item. And really, this is something that you all have. So on top of just employees, every employee or admin in Lattice also has their own unique employee profile page. The Your Team tab is the manager view. So anyone that has a direct report in the system actually has this tab. And this is where you can see all of your direct reports in one place, where you can turn on different tools for them, and really just kind of view everything in one kind of concise place. On Thursday, we actually have our manager employee training. So if you have anyone on your team you want to join, please have them sign up. This is where they would actually get trained on kind of how to turn on and use these different tools. The company page is really where all historical data at your company lives. So in our company, it's called Degree. You could go in, you could view your org chart. So this really just shows where everyone sits in the company. You could always see kind of active goals. This is a cool feature we have. And really this just shows goals owned by members of your company. They actually show up here, and also just dictates where people sit. You also can go into departments if you want to kind of get a sense of where people work. You can always look at goals. So maybe I want to look at company goals. Again, I'll go into the functionality here. And then also any real-time feedback. So this is really just like a public shout out or kudos page. So again, the company page is a public page. You can go in, you can add your company values. And really the idea here is this is just one place where people really can kind of go get more information about what the company's working on, and also something that really promotes transparency, which is probably one of the many reasons you guys actually chose Lattice. Where I'll spend the majority of my time today, though, is in the admin panel. The admin panel is where all administrator functionality lives. So we'll spend most of our time here today, and then I'll also kind of be going back and forth to the employee view, so you can actually kind of get a sense of how things look on their side as well. So to start, the very first step in kind of configuring your Lattice account is getting all of your employees added to the system. So here you'll actually see in my company, here are all the employees, and there's kind of different user statuses. There's kind of 3 ways to add your employees to the system. The first is with one of our HRIS integrations. So if you scroll down here and click on integrations on the left, here you'll see all the HRIS systems that we currently integrate with. Zenefits, Bamboo HR, Namely, Workday, and ADP. And so if you are using one of those systems, it's as easy as kind of clicking in. It'll take you into that HRIS. You configure the integration. And the nice thing about that is basically we look for real-time feedback and bring people over and kind of deactivate them. I'd say it's about half of our customers. The other half of our customers actually don't use one of these HRISs, which is totally fine. And the other way you can add people is via a CSV upload. So if you click the CSV upload button, we'll basically tell you all the information we want about each of your employees. So the required names are an employee's full name, their title, their email, and then the kind of a manager email we also ask you to include. The optional fields are start date, phone number, and status. Status is just a way to kind of manage if they're still at the company. So for kind of the initial upload, you're going to put active. But if later you wanted to remove someone from the system, you could put terminated, and we would automatically deactivate them if they leave your company. It's really easy. You click this download template button. It will download an Excel sheet. And then when you go into the Excel sheet, you just populate it and then upload the CSV. So the CSV upload's simple. It should take you a couple of minutes to actually upload. And once it's uploaded, you'll see all of your users in what we actually call a created state. And a created state just means that an employee doesn't have access to the system. It's a nice way for you to really kind of start testing things with your employee profiles created, but without actually inviting them. Once you're ready to invite them, you can either go one by one and click the send invite button, or you can send all invites. Once they receive an invite, they'll have access and can just log in via by setting up an email. So really straightforward. If you want to just invite people one by one, I don't recommend that from like a time sake just because it takes a bit, but just, you can do it and you just click this invite members button and you essentially go in and add their email address here. It will send them an automatic email and then you can always go in and kind of edit their profiles. So speaking of, if I go to my active users, let's say an employee's information changes. They change their job title or manager. It's as simple as clicking these three dots and then clicking edit profile. And here you can add their preferred first name, their work email address if it changes. You can select their department, their job title, so on. And then you also can change their manager. So managers are very important in Lattice because it really just kind of dictates visibility. As a manager, you have full visibility into all of your employees' kind of public and private data. So it's really important you keep that up to date. But it's as easy as clicking the X and adding a new manager to change them. Start date, which is really helpful if you want to put someone's time zone. And then we actually are releasing a new feature. I don't think it's available for everyone yet, but it should be before the end of the week. And it's called custom fields. So we already have birth date and gender in there. Really, it's just a way for you guys to include any additional information that's pertinent to your company. So some really common ones are like office, level, salary range, role. Again, some of these information would be visible. You can make them either private or public. So if I go here to this custom fields feature, here you can see all the custom fields that I created at my company. And then you also can decide if you want to be admin only. And then what we're adding functionality, and I think it's live. Yep, it's coming, not yet. You can make it public. So if there's something like salary, which is obviously very private, you can have that in Lattice and just have it be visible to your admins. But if you want something like office location shared with the company, you can make that public. So we're just finishing that functionality this week, and it should be live. And we generally send product update emails every other Friday. So we'll be sure to communicate with you all and kind of provide you some more information as soon as it goes live in the product. I'm in a demo instance, which is why I have kind of some additional info in here. Custom fields is also really helpful for our engagement tool. So the surveys tool is our newest product. It is an additional product on top of performance, and really the custom fields ties in very nicely there. I'm not going to spend any time in engagement just because it's a new product, but our CEO is actually doing a webinar coming up. So if you're interested in learning more about how we're kind of combining performance and engagement, I'd really recommend for you to attend or at least sign up so we can send you the recording. Cool. So that's custom fields. Again, it's a way for you guys to include kind of more pertinent information to your employees. You also can configure your departments here, and then permissions. So permissions are important for a lot of reasons, but really the main reason is for admins in Lattice, they have full access and full visibility into everything. So if, maybe it's just your HR team, maybe you add your CEO as an admin, but if you want to change someone's permission level, you click the three dots and you click edit permissions. Here it looks like they're already a restricted user, but if you want to make them an admin, you certainly can, and essentially they'll have full access. We have a couple other special permissions that I'll just walk through now. So restricted users is kind of the common, 95% of your company will be that. But if for whatever reason you want to allow a non-admin to create review cycles, you can. The use case here is maybe your VP of engineering or sales wants to run one-off reviews for their team. You can always go in and give them this permission, which really will allow them to kind of set up unique reviews for their team. Keep in mind, you're going to have to kind of get them up to speed on the product. They can always join one of our webinars to learn more. But something that you just have to be mindful that there's obviously kind of a different level of product education required to kind of set up a review. The other is if you have any IT help. So if you have someone on your team that really helps you with the HRIS integration or Slack or single sign-on, which I'll walk through in a second, you could enable them to set things up. And essentially what they'll have access to is just this integrations and single sign-on page. So they don't have access to any of the private kind of performance information, but my head of IT could go in if they have the IT admin permission and set up single sign-on. Speaking of, so we do have single sign-on. We basically, anyone that has SAML or SAML 2.0, which are most of your most common SSO providers, you can do single sign-on through Lattice. A lot of stuff in our help center, it's probably the most technical part of Lattice. So I'd recommend if you have technical help or kind of IT help at your company, definitely ask for some help here. And you can just give them that IT permission. But essentially, once single sign-on is turned on, it will require every employee at your company to actually sign in via single sign-on. We never lock in an admin out of their account. So if something were to break with single sign-on, you would always be able to log in as well. So we are mindful of that. And then our last integration is just Slack, which we'll walk through in a bit. But if you wanted to set up the Slack integration, again, it makes you go into the Slack side. So you'd also have to be a Slack admin there. So keep that in mind as you're kind of setting up these integrations, is that, you are also required to have admin access in that specific software as well. So that might be helpful as you're kind of thinking about someone that you might need to give IT admin permissions to. Cool. Once I have my permissions, I can always just go in and look here. And so it looks like I have 4 admins at this company. And then we also just call up managers of managers. So managers and managers are an important concept in Lattice for a couple reasons. First off is you have the ability to kind of turn on top-down visibility. So we think of top-down visibility as someone who's a manager of a manager, and they not only can see their direct report stuff, but they also can see their indirect report stuff. So on a couple of tools, we have this as an option. So one really kind of common question we receive is, hey, I'm the VP of engineering, and I have kind of 3 levels below me. Is it possible to view all of their kind of performance review data? The answer is yes. And as an admin, you have to just check this box, and it basically allows any of your managers of managers to see down. You can also do the same for update tool, if that makes sense for your company as well. For goal setting, for private goals, which again, I'm gonna walk through all this, it's always on. For feedback, we don't currently have that as an option, or for one-on-ones. There's kind of no top-down visibility yet. We are building an HR business partner permission in Q4, so sometime before the end of the calendar year. So you will have the option to kind of, maybe you have someone on your HR team that just works with population or kind of department. You'd be able to kind of just give them admin access into those people's data. So really excited about what's kind of coming here. And then a couple of last things is we released a new feature called impersonations. And essentially this is a way for any admin to go into any other user's account in read-only mode. So it's a really helpful thing for kind of, it's a really helpful thing for just troubleshooting. You can't go in and actually take actions, but if someone on your team is asking you questions about what they're seeing, or you're just trying to help, if you go to employees, I don't have this access because I'm already impersonating. But if you click these 3 dots, you guys would see a impersonate employee button, and it would allow you to kind of go right into their account. And then, just to be safe, we always log it here in the impersonation table. The last thing is if someone reaches out to you about having issues with their password, you can always send individual users a password reset. Cool. So that is kind of the people side. Again, active users are in the system. Invited users have not accepted their invite. And then when you guys upload everyone for the first time or use an HRIS, you'll see this created tab. So you have to actually invite them first. Company page. This is just where you guys can store more company information. So you can go in and add kind of your employee logo. Some of this is a little bit more dated features, but if they make sense, you could always turn them on. You could add your company mission statement. And then probably most exciting is you can always add your company values. So if you want to turn these on, you can see these on the company page. And then also if you're using our real-time feedback tool, you can attach company values there as well. So I'll walk through that functionality in a second. Awesome. So I'm now going to dive into some of the more specific tools and how to configure them. And then again, I'll save a majority of the last probably 20 or 25 minutes walking through performance reviews. So if I go to our goal setting tool, I start with goals. How it's organized is there's just different kind of headings on the left-hand side. So auditing is really just a place for you as admins to kind of view all of the goals and audit what's going on. So you can view when they're due, when they were last updated. We have a tagging system, so if you want to look at specific tagged goals, owners by specific department. I won't spend too much time here, but there's a lot of kind of filtering you can do as admins, and you also can look on an individual level. Again, all this is exportable to a CSV as well. I love this complete displayed goals button. It's really helpful as you're kind of thinking about goals kind of quarter over quarter. Maybe you guys want to kind of move on to your next quarter. So what I could basically do is go to Q2 2018. So these are all goals that have end dates in Q2, and click complete displayed goals. And essentially it won't artificially inflate the goals, but it basically just say, yep, I'm kind of archiving all the goals that were already due because they ended in Q2. So that's just kind of a helpful feature to kind of keep your guys' account clean. Activity is pretty straightforward. This just shows any goal updates company-wide. And then tags, this is really just a way for you guys to come up with a preset list of tags. So when an employee is setting up a goal, they're asked to kind of tag it with specific headings. So tags, how I'm generally seeing this be used is either by team, maybe by due date, maybe by a project. Really, it's very flexible. And so kind of there's a lot of use cases, but we really keep it flexible for you all. And then probably most importantly are the settings. So we have settings for each tool. So I'll walk through each of these now. The first is the display name. So again, we call this the goals tool, but we realize that a lot of companies, they actually use different nomenclature. So if that's the case, maybe you guys call it priority. And essentially what you can do is when you save that, almost in every place in Lattice, let me just refresh. I'm gonna go back to my employee profile, kind of my employee view. Instead of create a goal, you'll see create a priority, priorities. So this is just a helpful way if you guys have your own internal naming to make it more specific and branded to your company. Again, most of our customers are using goals as the name, but if that doesn't make sense, you can always use priority as well. Perfect. And then if you go to allow goals to be displayed within the org chart, again, this just shows those kind of top 3 goals. So if I go to company and I look at our org chart, if you wanted to kind of see how goals are tied to employees and kind of aligned, you could always turn on that goals and org chart feature, and it just allows employees to kind of get more insight into how goals are set and how they're kind of aligned throughout the company. So that's a cool feature. Again, not everyone uses it, but it's helpful if you guys really do have kind of goal alignment in your goal setting processes. A couple other settings here. The first I will go into is just default priority visibility. So let me just change this back to goals so it's a little bit less confusing. Cool. So here is a way for you guys. So by default in Lattice, when someone creates a goal, an individual goal, we'll make it private. But if you guys are someone that are really kind of trying to drive transparency, you could always have the default be public, which just means that I'll actually have to go over and click private. And then if you're kind of on the opposite end, and maybe you actually don't want goals owned by individuals to be public ever, you can just make individual goals private. Really the main difference between public and private goals are that private goals are just visible to you and your manager. Whereas public goals are visible to the entire company. So if I create a public goal, even if it's just owned by me, the rest of the company would be able to see it on my employee profile page. Private, they want it. So I'd say at most smaller companies, maybe less than 100 employees or so, they generally are okay with public goals. They really want to put transparency. Even a lot of our bigger customers that have kind of, transparent cultures. But if you're very new to goal setting and you just want people to kind of start with private goals and maybe more developmental goals, you can always restrict them from setting public goals. And then the last feature is just the reminder cadence. So actually once a month is best practice, but really all this means is this is just how often we'll notify your employees that own goals to actually go in and update them. So I think once a month is kind of the perfect amount. If you're really kind of trying to build more habits here, you could always do once a week or once every 2 weeks. And again, this will just send them one email letting them know, hey, it's time to update your goals. And then that will also relate to our task system. Oh, there are none here. But when you get an email, you'd see a little task at the top as an employee letting you go in to actually update your goals as well. So that's the goal setting tool. The last thing I'll just show you before I move on is the ability to disable. So if for whatever reason, any of these tools look interesting to you all, but you just don't feel like the company's quite ready for them, or maybe you kind of want to stagger how you're rolling things out, you can always disable one of the tools, and that just prevents people from actually seeing anything when they're in the system. So maybe you guys aren't ready for goal setting. If you click disable, again, you can always go into the admin and look at things, but it wouldn't allow anyone to actually set any goals in Lattice until you enable it, excuse me. Awesome, so that's goal setting. I'm now gonna go through our manager tools. So manager tools. So our first one is a updates tool. And as a reminder, the updates tool is just a list of questions that managers send to their employees at a cadence of their choosing. We actually have a webinar on Thursday about our manager tools. So it's like an hour, probably won't be that long, but if you wanna learn more, we're gonna go a lot deeper here. But if you click view update, essentially these are a list of questions that Sam's manager sent him, and Sam just answers them at a cadence that kind of the manager selects. So you can always go in and look at the different updates as in auditing, and then there's a lot of good reporting functionality in all of these tables. So if you want to look on an individual who's even using these, you can see on the right who has them turned on. If it's not blue, it means their manager hasn't turned on the tool for them. With updates, if this is something that you guys like, you as admins could actually turn them on for employees that don't have them. And then if the managers ever want to turn them off later, they can. I think this is a good way if you guys are really kind of trying to create habits here. I would recommend doing this. Again, you can export anything. You can filter by manager department. And then another thing I want to show you here are just these manager and department views. So for managers, maybe you're really kind of trying to understand which of your managers are using the tools. You can always go to these auditing tables and, maybe you reach out to Michael Stein and say, hey, Michael, looks like, you have updates turned on for all of your employees. You have 53% participation. How are you using the tool? And I've just found this a good way to kind of find internal champions, understand why it's working for them, and then ultimately kind of pass that information along or build use cases internally. Similar for departments, you can filter by dates and then export the CSV. So that's just the auditing capabilities. If you go into settings, this is where you can kind of tweak a couple things. So the first is that employee sentiment score. So again, if we go back, there's a question at the end of each update, if you have it turned on, that just asks employees how they're feeling, 1 to 5. It's not customizable right now, but you can imagine it's a really good tool if managers, just want to make sure that nothing's wrong or things are going well maybe. So that's one feature that you can turn on or off at the company level. And then the other is public updates. So I would say that the majority of companies we work with have this turned off. What it does if it's turned on is it allows an employee to actually give an update publicly. So for companies that are using these public updates, they might have their team leads, or maybe you just have a small company that's super transparent. They use the updates tool and everyone checks in publicly. And on Fridays, they actually all go in and just kind of look at what other people are working on. Because it's a manager tool though, the majority and what it'll actually default to in your guys' new Lattice accounts is to be off. And so updates are just shared with my manager and it's more of a private kind of status report where I'm checking in. The next thing is just this defaults. So what you guys can do as kind of admins is set company-wide defaults. So these 4 questions here are just Lattice's standard template. But if for whatever reason you guys wanted questions more kind of branded or specific to your company, you could edit the questions and start with a template that basically anyone that turns on updates company-wide would start with these questions and start with this cadence. So for updates, generally the most common is weekly, but we do see some companies that are using them monthly. The companies that are using it monthly, they're using these more of like a miniature self-review. So you can imagine as an employee, there might be months at a time where, in between performance reviews where I'm not actually, checking in on my personal development. That's a good use case of the updates tool. And then what I generally recommend is this manager override, because that allows managers to actually go in and customize the questions and cadences for their direct reports. So if this is turned on, as a manager, if I go to my Your Team tab, again, manager view, I can actually go in, turn on kind of one-on-ones or updates. Let me just go to updates, excuse me. And I can actually edit the questions for my direct reports. So if I don't want to use kind of the questions that my admins use are created for me, I could create my own for each employee and my own cadence. I also can turn them on and off if it doesn't make sense as a manager for my team. If you want to do team-wide settings, it's as easy as just clicking team settings. And then this would apply to all of your employees. So some good manager functionality here as well. Awesome. So that's the updates tool. I'm now going to go into the one-on-ones tool, which is where we've actually spent a lot of time this past quarter just adding some new functionality. But this looks identical to updates, really just an auditing table where you guys can kind of take a look at everything. And then if you go to settings, right now you just have the ability to disable them. So one-on-ones are definitely a little bit more manager controlled. There's actually no way right now for you as an admin to actually turn them on for managers and employees. And the reason that is that generally this is linked to a calendar or to a meeting time, and just generally you don't know when that is. So what I would recommend is if you have managers and employees, which you probably do, that are having weekly one-on-ones, I would highly recommend that you encourage them to use our one-on-one tool. So if managers go to your team, and let's say, for example, I want to turn them on, the first thing Lattice will ask you as a manager is, when are you meeting next? So maybe we meet every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern. We meet weekly, which generally is the case for one-on-ones. You could always change this. And then as a manager, this is actually a new feature. I can add recurring talking points. So if there's something I want to make sure we discuss in every one-on-one, I can always go in and add those. So it could just be a quick bandwidth check-in, project X. So now in every one-on-one that I have with James, those will always be agenda items that we cover. And then throughout the week, again, because this is more of a manager-employee tool, we can both go in. And so if I look at next one-on-ones, you can see they're already here. And both James and myself, who's my direct report, we can both add agenda items. And then as soon as the meeting starts, we can always go in, we can comment on the talking points, we can create shared notes. And then if there's something as a manager I want to just have for myself privately, I can do that. And the view on your employee side looks identical as well. We actually just released mobile apps. They're live in both the Apple Store for iPhone users and Google Play for Android users. So if you have managers that really like one-on-ones, but maybe they don't want their computer in front of them, they can actually just download our mobile apps and use their mobile apps for the one-on-ones. So that's really kind of the main functionality that's in the mobile, the app, is the ability to use them for one-on-ones. Cool. Again, please join us on Thursday if you want to learn more about the manager tools. Awesome. The last tool I'm going to go into before reviews is just feedback. Similar to the rest, good auditing functionality here at the top, organized by individuals, managers, departments. One thing that's probably really critical with feedback is just making sure you guys have full visibility to make sure there's nothing, being shared that you wouldn't want. So you can always go in and click view. If there's something you didn't want in Lattice, you could always go in and delete it for whatever reason. And then we also show you the level of visibility. So I'm just going to go into the settings first, and then I'll kind of walk through functionality. And really the biggest thing about settings is there's one setting here, and it allows, it's kind of how you guys think of private feedback. So to take it a step back, in Lattice, when I'm giving someone private feedback, let me just go here, and I'm gonna click give feedback. There's kind of 3 types of feedback I can give. First, it can be private. Second, it can be public, or it can just be to the employee's manager. So manager only is probably feedback that I don't feel comfortable sharing with that employee, and I just want to share with the manager. So who's the feedback about? Bodhi, and we're telling you only Bodhi's manager, Andrew, will see it. Hey, Bodhi, will you discuss the following issue with Bodhi? Oh, it would be Andrew. That doesn't make sense. Sorry about that. And then it would just go to Bodhi. Private feedback is actually intended for you and that employee. So this is feedback you just want to send to Bodhi, but you don't want the rest of the company to see it. So the setting that we have is actually impacts this setting here. So basically what we're saying is, do you guys think that private feedback of your company should just be between the giver and the receiver of that feedback? Or do you want Bodhi's manager to see it? You guys get to configure that kind of based on your company culture. I would say that for smaller companies, generally they just have it be between the 2 people. They really kind of don't want managers to be biased or see it. For larger companies that maybe are a little bit more worried about escalations or managers not seeing important kind of private feedback, they'll leave it on like this company does. So Bodhi's manager can see all private feedback. And then public feedback is by far kind of our most overwhelmingly used type of feedback. And this is just public shout outs. So generally this is praise or kudos or something you want to give someone recognition for. And you can always go in and add the feedback here. With public feedback, you can give up to 6 people feedback. So if you worked with a bunch of people that really helped you on a project, this is a great use case. And then you can always go in and tag your company values, which I walked you guys through earlier. So it's more kind of specific to your company and more contextual. Requesting feedback is also a great tool. So as a manager, you can either request feedback about yourself or about one of your employees. As an employee, you can only request feedback about your own self. But essentially, it will send that employee an email and then a task in Lattice asking them to give you feedback about who you asked it for. And then note to self is just a little bit more general. And this gives you the ability as an employee to either log a note about your own self or about someone else, and it would never be in a performance review. So maybe I want to actually do a note to self. I did a great job on today's admin webinar training. Save. Now, again, where this all becomes contextual is, let's say I'm doing my performance review. In the right-hand side, you can actually see that note to self. So as I'm filling out what I'm most proud of, I actually say, today's webinar training. And then I can always go look at my goals as well. So our companies that are most successful with Lattice are the ones that are using all of the tools, and they're ones that during their performance review have a lot more context and really a lot less recency bias because they're able to kind of pull from existing feedback and existing goals when they're filling out the reviews. Awesome. So that is the feedback tool. I'm now going to spend time in reviews. One caveat here, because reviews is pretty, there's a lot here. There's a couple things I'm not going to spend much time on, so I'll just describe them high level. One is our automation tool. So our automation tool is just a way for you guys to create rules based on someone's start date. So if I click create new rule, 1 month check-in, you could just say 1 month after an employee starts, I want to kick off a review cycle, and it will automatically create cycles, and it's really kind of used more for onboarding. So that's the automation tool, kind of more of an onboarding tool based on someone's start date, because you give us that information when you're adding employees is actually when they joined your company. The other thing I'm not going to spend too much time on is scored attributes. Scored attributes, we actually just released a ton of analytics and performance reviews actually this quarter. So scored attributes is essentially a way for you guys to create a rating scale for managers to rate their employees. The rating scales are completely customizable, so you can see one here. You can customize the ratings. It could be 1 to 3, 1 to 10, whatever you guys want. And then you can add attributes. And then a lot of kind of the analytics that we have is tied to this feature. So the reason I'm not going to spend too much time here is that generally a lot of the smaller companies we work with aren't actually doing ratings yet. We're not against it. I'm not necessarily telling you not to do ratings, but the majority actually don't use it. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time to walk through other stuff. But if you do want to learn more about analytics, we have scored attributes, we have a calibration tool, and we also have a weighted score tool. And we actually did a webinar on that about a month ago. So there's some good stuff if you want to learn a little bit more about review analytics. Cool. So now that I've covered what I'm not going to go over, let's dive into what we should cover. So the first thing, very similar to the other tools, is this auditing table. But the very first step in setting up a review cycle is actually setting up your templates. The templates are just a list of questions that reviewers answer. So you can see all of your kind of historical ones here. We're actually finishing up a new feature that will be live in a couple of weeks where you can actually sort and kind of tag templates. You can archive them. We know that for some of our longer kind of existing customers, they can get a little messy. So that's coming. But if I click create new template, first thing you can do is just ask the question. So what are your greatest strengths? You can always add description. So this is just optional, but if there's something you want to link out to or just add more context. And then comment questions are just open-ended, whereas rating and multiple choice, rating will ask for a clear rating. You could do 1 to 3, you could do 1 to 10, you can change these. And then multiple choice, I'm gonna give you 4 options, pick one. You could also be 5 options, whatever you guys want. And then multiple select is I'm gonna give you multiple options, pick as many as you want. One thing that's really common, so I'm just gonna do this as more of an open-ended because we're asking about greatest strengths, is maybe it is, how would you rate your communication skills? So maybe I want to do a rating question, and maybe I want to do an optional comment, so if anyone wants to provide more context, they can. So that's really common as well, is just making this one question, but making the comment optional. If you like your rating scale and you don't want to have to kind of do extra work, you can always duplicate a question, and it's just going to completely copy it below, and you can change it. So maybe it's how would you rate your leadership skills? Cool. So templates are pretty straightforward. As you're working through them, you can always, once it's ready to go, you can save and preview. So I'm just going to click that. Oh, 1 second. Cool. So this shows me exactly what it looks like to employees as they're filling it out. And then the last feature in templates is just this private question feature. So the private question feature is generally used in maybe peer reviews or manager reviews where they're reviewing their employees. So maybe it's a manager review. We want to ask the manager, should this employee be eligible for a raise? That's something that you wouldn't necessarily want to share with the employee, but you probably want that information as an admin. If that's the case, you could always just make this, maybe it's a multiple choice, yes, no, why. You want to comment, and then you want to be private. And essentially a private question is just the answers are only shared with the manager and admins. The employee being reviewed would never see it. So we see this as a common use case, or maybe in a peer review, the question is, is there anything you'd like to share privately with this employee's manager? You can have a completely transparent culture at your company, but you want to give employees the option to kind of provide private feedback to an employee's manager. That's really helpful in like a peer review. Cool. So that's templates. So the first step is setting up templates, and now let's set up a review cycle, which is what templates live in. So if I go to auditing, create new cycle, first thing I'm going to do is just give it a name. Then we're going to select who should be reviewed. So here, if you're just doing company-wide, it's as simple as selecting all employees. But if for whatever reason you just want to do new employee, teams or individuals, you can. It's organized by the org chart, but if you wanted to see it by department, maybe I just want to do one for our engineering R&D team. Or if I want an individual list, I can always just go in and click the people I want. If there's a kind of random list of employees you want to do, you can always just upload a CSV with their emails. Lattice will look for matching users and will kind of populate it for you on the right. The most common use case I see there is maybe you don't want your newest hires to participate. Instead of kind of going through and removing them, you can just upload a CSV that doesn't include them. So again, the reviewees section is where you're just picking who do you want to receive a review in this review cycle. So at the end of the cycle, who actually gets a review packet. The other important thing here is to always double check your org chart. So the reason the org chart is really important for reviews is that's how we determine who is being reviewed by one another. So my manager will review me. Maybe it's a 360, so my direct reports will review me. As long as your org chart's correct, Lattice will know that and will assign the reviews accordingly. So reviewers is where you're determining review relationships. So if there's a self-review, again, one thing that's nice in Lattice is you can have multiple templates in one cycle. So all that means is that when I'm filling out my self-review, I can have very different questions than the questions I fill out about my manager, which is upward feedback. So maybe I want to do that. I want to do upward feedback. I want to turn on peer reviews, but I want to use this one. And then downward feedback. So this is just where managers review their employees. I can also pick a different template. So really important, obviously, and I'd say a lot of companies decide to use different templates. And then there's also companies that find it really interesting to use the same template regardless of the direction because it's interesting for comparison purposes. So it might be really interesting how I answer one question about myself versus how my manager answers the exact same question. And then here, there's a little bit of customization here, but the most common is to have a review template and a summary, which just means that as a manager, I'm not only required to just fill out those questions that I determined, but then there's also an open-ended text box that we just call a summary, where managers can add any additional context. The reason that's most popular option is most often a manager might forget something or just want to add something in. That open-ended text box gives them the chance. If you don't want to kind of have that extra step, you can just have them fill out a list of questions. And then if you actually don't want them to have the questions, but just write an open-ended summary, you have that option as well. Cool. So again, this is the type of review. If you're doing a 360, you'll have all the directions turned on. If maybe you are just doing a self-manager review, which is really common for companies that are just getting started, that's possible as well. A new feature that's going live in the next couple of weeks is you'll actually be able to have different templates based on custom fields. So if you guys have different departments at your company and you want the sales team self-review to be different than the engineering self-review, you could actually customize that and have them be in the same cycle but have totally different templates. So this is actually going to get a little bit more complex, but more than, if you want that complexity. So it's customizable, but if you want to keep it simple, you totally can, and just wanted to let you guys know that that is coming. So review settings, this is where a lot of kind of the customization comes into play. So the first is if you guys are using peer reviews. So if you have employees reviewing one another that aren't managers and direct reports, that could potentially be a peer. And so when you're going through kind of the peer process, we actually have a unique stage in Lattice before the reviews kick off, and it's called the peer nomination process. And that's included, there's kind of two options. You either can have employees select their peers and get them approved by their manager. So this is obviously a little bit more employee-centric, but if you want to streamline the process or you're worried about employees just selecting their 3 best friends, you probably have managers do it for them. Regardless of options, you as an admin get to go in, you get to override any selection. So if there's something you don't like or want to change, you can. And then even with this bottom option, it still does give managers the opportunity to change them as well. These top 2 options aren't as popular, but they are advanced settings, so I want to walk through them. So if you're at a company where you want to allow employees to nominate themselves, so as opposed to me nominating, Jeff to review me, Jeff could actually say, I actually want to nominate myself to review Grant. So it's kind of the opposite. You can turn this on. Again, it's an advanced option. Or You could allow peer reviewers to see self-reviews of people they are reviewing. So when I'm reviewing my peer, I could actually view their self-review. This is very uncommon, but some of our customers do use it. A really common feature is the ability to limit number of peer reviewers. So generally I recommend 3, 2 to 5 is kind of best practice. 5 is high, so I generally recommend 3. But what that means is that when I'm selecting peers, I can pick up to 3. My manager has to approve within 3. A couple last ones is ordering. So at a lot of companies, they actually wait for the managers to go last in the review writing process. What that means is that, let's say I'm a manager at my company, my admin or HR team wants to make sure that I'm incorporating all of the other feedback into my manager review. So they would force the manager to go last. If you want to streamline it, and maybe you guys are a little bit more new to reviews, I just recommend going at the same time. And what that just means is that I can start writing my manager review at the same time as the rest of the reviews go out. If you have a tight timeline as well, I definitely would recommend this option. This visibility option is kind of additional customization, but this is for companies that don't want any biased reviews. So as a manager, when my direct reports or reviews are being submitted, I can always see them, and that often will help me kind of write my own. But there's some companies, and probably the minority, that don't want managers to be biased. And if that's the case, you can turn this off. And so as a manager, I can't actually see the reviews as they're coming in about my employee. Again, most common is probably this, or forcing the manager to go last. For the scores section, again, I'm going to kind of skip over, but this is where you turn on either scored attributes, calibration on top of it, or a weighted score feature. Again, reach out to me if you want more information and I will follow up. And then the last thing is deliverables. So this is where you are dictating what an employee ultimately gets after the review cycle ends. So how the process works is the review cycle ends. At that point, all of the feedback with all of the names go to the manager, and then the manager is the one that's responsible for sharing it with their employee. So here, you can decide if you want both the manager's review and their summary to go back to them, or just the manager's summary. Generally, what you see at the top or whatever we've selected is generally best practice. For companies that are transparent, so companies that are doing 360s. If you have a transparent culture, you're probably okay with employees seeing their peer feedback or upward feedback, assuming they're also managers. If you were less transparent, you would keep it here, which means that, let's say I have a 360 being done on me, I would never actually see the peer feedback or my upward feedback. It would just go to my manager. If you want something in the middle, and this is actually fairly common, you could have it where I get all of my feedback from my manager. I get all of my peer and upward feedback, but my peer and upward feedback is anonymized. So I wouldn't actually know which of my peers or which of my direct reports it comes from. One note on this option is if you go with it, make sure the peer template and the upward feedback template are the same. If not, you can imagine if I'm a manager with one employee, I'll know which of my direct reports said it. So that's why it's important to use the same questions if you anonymize things. But again, I would say the majority of small companies are generally transparent. A lot of larger companies maybe don't feel as comfortable with that transparency, and they just want the feedback to go to managers. And then as a manager, I can kind of decide what I want to communicate down. Cool. So I'm going to share all feedback because Lattice, we are a transparent culture here. And then control. So this is a good feature for customers that really just want to move the process along. So by default, only admins can end the review cycle. For your first one, I might recommend actually keeping it that way, just so you guys have the ability to kind of make sure that things are moving along, you feel really kind of comfortable before things go out to managers. However, if you guys really trust your managers and you want them to kind of take ownership of the process, you could always allow them to end things. So what that means is, let's say Caroline's on my team. As soon as I finish up kind of the reviews and I see that all of her reviews have been submitted, instead of waiting for the admin to kind of end the review cycle on her due date, I could just go in and end it and share it with Caroline because I'm in there and it's just easier. However, If you want to kind of have full control as an admin, I wouldn't give managers that ability and keep it internally. Cool. Last couple of features here. So again, this is another thing that I would recommend using manually, but there is a feature in Lattice where you can put everything on a timeline. What that means is that you guys can go in and select the days of the week where everything goes out. So maybe you want peer selection to kick off what would that be? Friday. You want to end a week from then. You want to send out a reminder in the between. Here's the email that goes out. And as you can see, you can basically automate every single step in the process. The reason I actually recommend not using this, and I would say the majority of our customers don't, is because generally reviews can take a bit longer, especially your first ones. So I think it's a way to give you guys control, and maybe even more importantly, it's a way to ensure that you kind of learn the process. I promise it's not that much extra work. It's just a good way for you as admins to really kind of make sure that you're learning and that people are moving along. Because on the timeline option, if you have peer selection to end on the 5th, if I haven't gone in and selected my peers, we're not going to wait. Lattice won't wait for them. We'll just kick things off into reviews. So sometimes this can actually sometimes end up causing more work if people aren't buttoned up. The companies I see that are using this really effectively are really kind of strict with their timelines and really let employees know, like, hey, the system's moving on, so you need to get them done in time. So if that's kind of how you guys operate, totally cool to use this, but I generally recommend custom. Awesome. Last step is we will verify all of the settings that we all just worked through together. And then I will click create review cycle, create, and this is where most things are locked. So there's a lot of functionality once the review goes live. What I probably want to do is just go in and launch peer selection. So here's the email. This is completely customizable. We're going to tell you the 11 employees that are in this cycle. They're going to be asked to select peers. And once I send this launch email, we are officially live. So a lot of functionality here. I'm not going to spend too much time, but I did just want to show you a couple things. First thing here is, you guys will get very comfortable with this view, but this is where you can see all of the employees and then kind of where they're at. So if I wanted to go in and kind of override, maybe Andrew's out of town and I want to select peers for him, I could either send a reminder or I can always click override peer selections, override, and I could actually go in and select 3 peers on behalf of this employee as well. So for whatever reason you guys want to kind of do overrides, you can. But this is just a good way for you guys to kind of have control and visibility into peer selection as it's going on. You can see kind of this little progress bar on top. And then once you guys are at 100%, you can end peer selection and actually kick off the reviews. A couple things here is if managers don't approve of who their employees select, we will just automatically assume that those are effective. So if I pick 3 people and my manager never gets to approving them, those 3 people are the people that I get. So I would recommend moving on even if your managers haven't approved them, but did want to call that out. But let's say I'm at 100%. Should probably wait, but obviously we're demoing. I'm going to end peer selection. And now I'm going to actually write my kickoff email. Here we give you some good criteria about what to include in your kickoff email. Again, always can email yourself a preview, see who it's going to go to, and then send the kickoff email. So once the review is live, very similar to peer selection, this is where you have full visibility into kind of how they're coming in, progress reports. If I want to go to reviewers, these are the people writing reviews. So I can always write remind and complete. So this sends everyone a reminder that hasn't filled out the review, like, hey, it's time to fill out your review. Please go in and do it. If you want to remind individuals, you can do that as well. We always can customize all of these reminders. And then quite a bit here. If the review cycle, as the review cycle is coming in and being submitted, and you can always export things if you just want to start looking through the data as well. And then you can always end the cycle. So once things are done, you can end the review cycle. And then the very last thing is you also have the ability to individually end cycles. So if for whatever reason, Andy's pretty much done, you don't want to wait for the rest of the employees. You can just end the review cycle for Andy, and that will actually allow Andy's manager to go in and kind of share the packet with them. So this is really helpful, especially as you guys are kind of starting to hit your deadlines of being able to kind of close people out individually without kind of holding up the rest of the company. Or sorry, yeah, close things out individually without kind of locking everyone else out. Cool. So I know there was a ton of information there. Again, we didn't really get much into the analytics of reviews or the rating stuff or engagement surveys if that's a product that you guys also have purchased. So if you have any follow-ups, this is the perfect time to ask. I'm also going to share a survey right now. I would really appreciate if everyone just took 30 seconds. It's just a couple of questions to provide us with your feedback about what you would have liked to have seen. A couple last things. If you have any questions, you can always access our help center. We're constantly updating it with new content and new videos. And then when you guys are in Lattice, you should see a little chat bubble where you can reach our support team. So our support team is available kind of business hours on the West Coast. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. If we're offline, we'll get back to you as soon as we're back online. And really hope that you guys found this tutorial or kind of demo helpful. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. Thank you so much for your time, and please, please, please take our survey. Thank you so much. I have about a minute or two, so I'm just going to hang on. But if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat button in Zoom. Cool. First question, is there a limit for content on reviews? There is not a limit. So both on the minimum or maximum side, I think actually, sorry, there is a maximum limit, but I don't actually think we've ever seen anyone reach it. It's like 10,000 characters or something pretty absurd. However, one thing I do recommend is to put some parameters in the template. So if I'm actually doing a template, one thing you can always do in the description is, please provide 2 to 3 sentences. You can at least provide parameters, but we don't place a limit that requires people to have a certain amount of content at this time. Yep, and no maximum as well. Again, I had never seen anyone reach that, which is why I think generally just giving kind of some parameters in the description of kind of what you expect them to write is really helpful. Anything else? Is there a link to send a review instead of an email form? Good question. So right now, if they log into Lattice, they'll always see their task. The very first step you have to do is you have to go in and invite people, because that's how we know they're active users and that's how they create a profile. But at any point, if they log into Lattice, if they haven't written their review, they're going to have this task here and it's not dismissible. We also track their progress. So every time you send a reminder, it will send them an email. I believe if you were just to send them this link, I don't think this is unique to your profile, but right now I don't think we have that feature. You would have to send them emails and they'd have to go into Lattice. Good question. Anything else? Awesome. Well, again, thank you all. If you have any questions, please follow up with us, again, in our support channel. And again, would really appreciate if you all just took a minute to take that survey. And thank you all for joining. I really appreciate your time.